So good evening, everybody. My name's Hamish Robertson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Watch Collectors Club. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Rolex Daytona, because it's one of the most famous watches in the world, and certainly one of the most popular Rolexes. And today I'm just going to give you a little history as to why that might be, and then looking forward to discussion as why you think it is still so popular, and then what other hype watches there are, and indeed what might come next in the world of watches in terms of very, very popular watches. But without further ado, we'll start with the Rolex stuff. So Rolex, interestingly, was not a chronograph house and isn't really ever thought of as a chronograph house. Rolex started with the chronographs in 1935. Before that, there were some mono-pusher chronographs. That's with just one button to start, stop, and reset them. But broadly, these are the chronograph references that Rolex sold up until around the 1950s. And you can see a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. We have the 2-register at the top, which only timed up to 30 minutes, and then the 3-register with a 12-hour subdial at 6 o'clock on the bottom. We see quite a variety of cases, and some of you will no doubt recognize the oyster case. So if you look at the 2 in the bottom right of this picture, you have oyster cases on these watches, which means they were waterproof with the screw-down crowns. But then the bottom left one has a completely different case, the top right. So this is a period of time when Rolex were experimenting with a lot of different cases across all their watches, and especially the chronographs. We have the tachymeter, telemeter scales there. Tachymeter is to measure speed over a distance, and telemeter is to measure distance at a speed. And then in the top right, we actually have a very, very rare dial on most watches, which is a pulsations dial for a doctor to judge somebody's pulse. But broadly, these are quite beautiful. They're quite recognizable as Rolex. They have a lot of dial text. They always have the Rolex brand name on. Some of them have a crown, some of them don't. But these watches were produced, as I said, between 1935 and 1950. And the reason that they're so famous among Rolex collectors, especially vintage collectors, is there are very, very few of them. It's thought that there's only around 700 of these watches in total of all the different references. That source comes from Goldammer, which is where this picture comes from. And basically, until someone turns up more research, it's assumed that there are that few of these watches. Then Rolex went on to continue development in the post-war period, and we got these 2 watches. These are both known as the pre-Daytona, and more so the one on the left than the one on the right, because the one on the left is more common. And there we have the oyster chronographs, so fully waterproof with a screw-down crown, but we have that much more still classic-looking dial, very classic hands, the triangular indexes for the hour markers, a very classic mid-century looking chronograph, similar to what many other brands produced at the time. That's a very beautiful example in gold. On the right is something a bit different. This has got the more modern sort of late 1950s, early 1960s dial on it that we have seen also on the Daytonas. What we now know as the Daytona, but there's much more 60s style numerals on the subdials, the straight hands, and the interesting seconds hand. This watch in particular is very famous. This is the exact watch that George Lazenby wore in the Bond film On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is pretty cool, making it the second Rolex to feature on the wrist of Bond after the Submariner worn by Sean Connery in the first 3 films. But this again has the smooth bezel that we know from so many Rolexes, but it has the tachymeter scale inside printed on the dial there outside the minutes track. Now, both of these watches were sold overlapping with what we now know as the Rolex Daytona. And so the thing to look at is the features that really make the Daytona so famous. So that's what we've got to look at next. And the first thing to look at is the bezel. So the scale, the tachymeter scale, has moved onto the bezel, and on the dial is only the seconds track. And the next thing that the Daytona is most famous for is the screw-down pusher, or the button you use to start and stop the chronograph and reset it. And here you've got a close-up of that screw-down pusher. But when they first launched, they looked like this one on the left. So they had the tachymeter bezel was a steel bezel. The pushers were round and weren't screwed down. The crown was screwed down, the case was the oyster case, and the dial was big and clean. So not much text on the dial. You'll notice it says Rolex Cosmograph, but not Rolex Cosmograph Daytona. The Cosmograph was a name that they'd used previously on a triple calendar moon phase watch that we talked about in the last event, which you can now watch on YouTube, from the 1940s. But for whatever reason, they decided to reuse this name for their chronograph movement. They obviously decided the word chronograph was too much used by other people, so cosmograph it was. And when they were first launched, which is in 1963, this is what they looked like. There was no Daytona written on the dial. Now, why is that? It's because at first they were not called the Daytona. They were called the Le Mans. Now, this picture on the right is an ad, an official Rolex ad that's very strange for two reasons. The first is the watch is upside down, which is a very odd thing to do in a magazine advertisement. The second thing that I've circled there is they've said, this is the new Rolex chronograph, it's called Le Mans. So the working title was they were going to call it Le Mans, associated with racing sport, but obviously Le Mans is the circuit and race, a famous 24-hour race in France, in southern France. Nothing to do with Daytona, which is in Florida. Daytona is a town in Florida, and it was a know-nothing town, entirely famous for this huge beach you can see in the picture on the left. The beach is famous and important because it's very wide and very, very flat. So in the 1930s, it became very famous for land speed record testing. And Malcolm Campbell did that while wearing a Rolex, became a Rolex ambassador. He refused payment, but he happily gave them testimony that the Rolexes he wore while reaching speeds as high as 300 miles an hour in his car on Daytona Beach, Rolex stood up to the task. But not long after the Second World War, it was realized that racing along the beach, as we see here today, and then back down along the main road of the town was unsustainable. So they built a big racetrack a bit further inland, which is still the Daytona Raceway today, which still holds both oval racing and track racing. And Daytona Beach itself is now a big tourist town, taking advantage of that huge sandy beach for tourists. We do not know, nobody knows, why the decision was made to stop calling this watch the Le Mans and to start calling it the Daytona. Yes, the Rolexes were associated with the area, but it had never been advertised before, other than the Malcolm Campbell advertisements that they'd printed with his testimony on it. But sure enough, a couple of years into the watch's life, they started writing Daytona on the dial, both at the 12 o'clock position and around the subdial at the 6 o'clock position. And Rolex in the 1960s made quite a lot of different watches. And as I said, they had overlap with those two previous chronographs we'd seen before. So if you're a chronograph hunter and wanted something from Rolex, those were your options. There were 4 different varieties at the time: screw down pushers, pump pushers, steel bezels, black aluminium insert bezels, and indeed that previous one with the older dial. But towards the end of the 60s, they introduced this watch, which is now the one that has become incredibly famous and is called the Paul Newman Daytona Collectors. This is indeed the watch that was sold recently at auction for $18.5 million, the one that belongs to Paul Newman. And this watch has a very interesting design, not least because it's now so famous that many of us will recognize the design, but interesting of itself. So this is late 1960s, it was introduced. The exact dates are not well understood. We have red minutes track, a light cream, slightly yellowy main dial color, the black subdials, and then these square dots on the subdials that make it this very 60s looking thing. And this dial design is the most valuable and is the one that is thought of as the Paul Newman Daytona. You'll notice that this one has pump pushers, not screw down pushers, and it has the steel bezel. So pretty straightforward, apart from this really eye-catching dial. But as I said earlier, lots of different options were available for on the Cosmograph Daytona model from Rolex, and that's why there's a lot of different variations out there. But this is the one with the super famous dial. So why is it that this dial became so famous? And this is actually a real head scratcher. So this is Paul Newman, and Paul Newman was an actor. He was a successful actor. He won 2 Oscars or Academy Awards, one early in his career and one late in his career. And he was basically a handsome chap who did sort of action roles and starring leads and was quite a heartthrob in Hollywood. And then he decided to stop acting so much and become a motor racing driver. And he became a very successful motor racing driver. He won a few races. He did it for the rest of his life while he was still able to. And while motor racing, he started wearing chronographs. And in 1972, is the first time he's known to come into the possession of this watch, and starting a love affair with Daytona chronographs that he wore the rest of his life. So there's quite a few that he did wear over time, some of which have come up for sale. But the mystery as to why this watch became associated with him and why this watch became famous is down to this book on the left. So this picture of Paul Newman is the front cover of a book called Paul Newman, The Pictures of a Life, in French. It was written in French, and then it has this mysterious presented by Rolex on the front cover. It is not known why this book was published or why it was sponsored by Rolex, but a book of nice pictures of Paul Newman was published in the 1980s, featuring this front cover picture. After that, and only after that, did this watch start to get traction amongst collectors. In the 1970s itself, this watch sold poorly. All of the chronographs sold poorly for Rolex, mainly because they weren't automatic. So many of you might know that the automatic chronograph was invented and launched in 1969 by 3 different companies and took over the watch world through the 1970s. People who wanted a mechanical chronograph would really just get one of the new automatic ones. And of course, the quartz revolution had begun in 1969, and through the 1970s, more and more digital and quartz watches became available that also had chronograph functions in, and especially in the 1980s. So in the 1970s, Rolex Daytonas did not sell that well. In total, they made nearly 20,000 of them. So if you think about that, it's less than 2,000 a year. It's really not very many compared to what Rolex were producing in their other ranges at the time, things like the Submariner and, of course, the Datejust and the Day Date. So it wasn't a very popular watch. But for some reason, after this book was published in the 1980s, vintage watch dealers started to say that the Rolex Daytona was now collectible. People say that even in the late 80s and early 90s, they could be picked up for £3,000 or £4,000, but that was still 10 times what they were sold for in the 1970s. They're usually selling for between $300 and $500 in that time new. So you'd say, well, that's quite a lot. But again, it's still not very much in the world at that time in the world of collectible Rolex. The blame is usually pointed at Italian dealers, which is something you see every so often in vintage watches, that the Italian dealers have made something famous. Now, I don't know any Italian dealers. I was not around in the watch world in these decades when Italian dealers are blamed for making things popular. So other than hearing that that's what happened, I can't tell you anything about why that happened. But that is indeed what is supposed to have happened with this watch. And so by the early 2000s, this watch is now quite popular. It is seen as a very collectible Rolex. And obviously we have these very different dial designs. They also produced some bright yellow dials with this, which on the gold case Daytonas are really quite a unique watch. So in the Rolex history and the vintage Rolex back catalog, these are interesting and outstanding watches. But compared to many others, they still weren't very popular. However, the fuss continued. Not least because in 1988, Rolex came out with the successor. They finally produced an automatic or self-winding chronograph using the El Primero movement from Zenith. That came out in 1988. And from when that came out, the line was consistently popular and grew in popularity for their new chronograph sales. They've continued to update it ever since, and it's continued to be popular. So a combination of factors really came together to produce this watch. So again, to remind you, we see 3 examples here of the classic Daytona, the one on the left being the super famous one from Paul Newman in its auction photography looking fantastic. The one in the middle being one of the very first years of Daytona, very simple contrasting subdial steel bezel. And then one on the right, I saw at an auction preview just to show you what it looks like in solid gold with that lemon colored dial. Really quite a nice watch. And again, with the screw down pushers there, giving you that extra size, extra chunkiness, even though it's a vintage watch. I guess a lot of people like that bigger look. But we might want to look at what they've done today. The one on the left at the bottom there is the El Primero, the 16520 with the El Primero movement in it. That's personally my favorite. And then the one on the right is the latest, the 126500. That's the latest one, updated again this year with the minor updates they did. And you can see what Rolex decided to do, despite their apparent unpopularity in the 1970s, is keep the screw down pushers. Despite the screw down pushers not being needed, for waterproofing, I mean, most modern chronographs don't have screw down pushers, but are completely waterproof to the depths that they're rated to. Rolex has persisted with it, and it gives that really iconic design. There are other watches out there with screw down pushers, but it's the Rolex Daytona that it's most famous for. Also, it's a great chance to reflect again, as we almost always do when we talk about Rolex, about how consistent Rolex's design language is. The main difference today, of course, with the modern one being we've now got the ceramic bezel. You cannot get a steel option, which I think is a bit of a shame. But that's Rolex's choice to put that fancy material in the bezel and give it that extra pop of color. And you've got the bigger indexes with the lumen, the indexes now, instead of the dots from the vintage versions. But again, that's very in trend with the modern watchmaking. But we can see the consistency of design. And now I think that's what I've prepared to tell you. That is the entire Daytona story. So now I'll finish there, and we'll pass it on really to hear why you think this watch is so popular, whether you like it, whether you dislike it, and what you think is going to happen to this watch in future might also be interesting to talk about. So does anyone have any thoughts on the Rolex Daytona?
Hi, Hamish. It's Ed here. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. I mean, for me, the Daytona is a very sort of, well, other than the price at the moment and that it's difficult to get, it's a very sensible, go everywhere, do everything kind of watch. They're very comfortable. The sort of curved lugs, the nice case size, the fact that they're not particularly showy or flashy. You know, they're a pretty simple watch with lots of interesting little variations, make it a really great all-rounder.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that's the Rolex sports watch promise. They really do want to make that for all their watches. I mean, what do you think about the sort of chunkiness that the Rolex, the current Daytona has?
It's, I guess we're so used to wearing big, chunky watches at the moment that actually having, you know, it's not that chunky compared to, you know, some of the modern Breitlings, certainly some of the Bremonts that we've seen. It's still quite an elegant case shape. So sure, it is bigger, but I still think it wears nicely, you know, particularly in comparison to a modern Submariner, for example, which, because it's designed to be a very robust diving watch, is chunkier, you know, doesn't fit quite so nicely under a shirt cuff, all that sort of stuff.
Anyone else got a thought on a Daytona past and present?
Well, I'm lucky enough to I've got a Daytona, but I was just trying to work out in about early 2000s. I bought a stainless steel one. I put my name down in Milton Keynes, and then I got the call and I went and bought it. So 3,700 was the price. So I got it. You know, it was a Grail watch for me. I got it, and I was just completely underwhelmed, and I put it away. And fortunately, I never wore it, and I was lucky. I've still got it, and so I've still got some plastic on it. But now it's to the point where I do like it now. When I first got it, I didn't really like it, but you know, now I don't wear it because it's in such nice condition. So it just sits in the safe, and then you think, well, what's the point in owning it? I don't really intend on selling it, you know. But so I'm sure other people are in the same sort of position. You know, I've got something that I don't wear because I don't want to take the plastic off of it, but I don't also want to sell it because it was so difficult to get. You know, I don't know. It's a strange thing, but I mean, I've learned to like it, and it does wear. You know, I do sometimes wear it a little bit. It does wear nicer than say a sub, but yeah. But I was one of those lucky people back then, with, you know, and then obviously they've skyrocketed in price. But you know, in a way, you know, I don't wear it out anywhere. You know, so it's good in a, like most of you guys probably know, it's good in a financial way, but in a way, you know, I've got something. It's like having a really lovely Ferrari with very low mileage on it. You own it, but you don't want to drive it and put the miles on it. You know, it's yeah, it's a strange thing. But I feel very fortunate to have been able to get one early on. Then, you know, before things got ridiculous. But it's a nice watch, definitely.
And would you have ever thought it would do that in terms of value, popularity?
No. I mean, back then, sort of early 2000s, you know, yeah. I mean, things didn't get as silly as they did. So yeah, it's strange. I mean, if we all had a time machine, we'd have gone back. I mean, I remember going to see. I went to Brent Cross to look at a IWC watch. It didn't seem that long ago, really. And I walked, I walked in there, and before I walked into the shop to look at this IWC, there was a Batman had been launched. And there was one in the window there. It seems crazy now. That it's just how things have got. But there we are. But they've invented a time machine.
There are so many brands and so many models actually where that has become the case, and it's sort of made it very difficult to collect watches now.
Yeah, definitely for sort of things you like, and the prices have got crazy. And but like I say, so it's, if I go into London, I'll wear a G-Shock, or some of my other things, or if I go to somewhere nice, I'll wear two watches. I'll wear a watch on the tube or on the train to get into London. I'm in Bedfordshire, so I'll wear, and then when I get there, I'll change watches. Wear my watch for the dinner or whatever, and then like switch watches to come back home. So it's sad, really, but that's it's the world we live in now.
And I guess that's one of the downsides of having such a recognizable watch. It's a great design, but people recognize it.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, people recognize it, and they just want it for not having to pay the cost or anything else. It's not nice.
No, definitely.
I mean, when I find it astounding that it's become the most popular Rolex and the most popular chronograph. Because when I looked it up a few months ago when I wrote this last year, actually, for a different talk, I couldn't believe that no one really knew even why it got named the Daytona. I thought there'd be a really good, like, classic Rolex marketing story behind the name, and there isn't. And then I looked into this Paul Newman guy, and he was, successful actor, but he wasn't a very successful motor racing driver. And he was just another guy, just another actor.
I think he was more successful as a race team owner than an actual driver, wasn't he?
Yeah. So it really comes down to that photograph that seemed to spark a craze and then the popularity of the watches from the 90s onwards in the new chronographs. But I just thought there'd be a lot more to it. And so it also kind of amazes me that it's kept going. I mean, Rolex are very clever, they offer a lot of options one year and then they take them away, and they sort of manufacture collectability and demand of different versions of each of their timepieces. They stick jewels all over them, including the dazzling Daytonas of recent decades. But it's still a really interesting watch for this to happen to. that's my view, and that's why I quite like telling the story, because it's so random that something can happen to something just totally and keep going. I mean, it's still their most popular watch.
I mean, I'd heard and read stories that they were so difficult to get rid of back in the day. They would offer them for a ridiculous discount. Just if you bought another watch, just to get rid of them. It's I think it's always been a good looking watch. Even from the outset, I think it's still a nice looking watch. But yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I'd read the same thing about couldn't move them for anything in the early days, and they were just discounting them to absolute stupid prices.
Yeah.
For a time machine.
And that's what makes them rare now. It's the same with those pre-war chronographs, because they only made 700, 900 of the pre-1950 chronos, because nobody wanted a chronograph from Rolex. You went to Longines or Omega or whoever else to get, or Breitling.
Yeah.
And the kind of the same, as I said earlier, when they weren't selling automatics until 1988, 19 years after everybody else started selling them. No wonder they couldn't shift them. And that's before you get to, like basically lemon yellow dials and things like that just sort of went out of fashion.
Yeah, it's a crazy situation.
I must say,
and now you just can't get one for anything.
No. And I must say, every time I try one on now, I fall in love with them again. All the slight different variations you can get with I've tried on quite a lot of the bimetal ones, the steel and gold at the moment. And they're really lovely watches to wear. They've got a lovely weight to them. They're very comfortable. They sit between my sort of wristbands nicely. I really like chronographs. I really like the style of the pushers, particularly the more modern ones. I really like the fact that the bezel doesn't move around. They're really lovely watches to wear. Maybe I should get one.
Get your name down, yeah.
Well, do we think it'll continue? So this is what puzzles me about this and the Nautilus, to be fair, as the two most hyped watches the last 10 years. Do we think their relative popularity will continue?
Never seems to
I mean,
subside, does it?
Doesn't seem to. I mean, when I bought my watch in the early 2000s, I mean, there was a wait list then. So, I mean, that's continued and got worse. So even back then, there was. I can't remember how long I waited now. I think it was probably year 18 months, which seems nothing now compared to nowadays. But yes, you're right. It's continued. It's well, since then it's just got. Well, I mean, yes, that's like 25 years later, and it's still the hottest watch, isn't it? It's funny. It makes me wonder whether it's because it's a really fantastic watch, or it's just the hype, isn't it? Really, I think unfortunately it's the having something that other people can't get and people want. Like this. It's with the swatch thing that came out. The moon swatches and that. I mean, realistically. It's that's a great watch for the money, but they weren't worth the money they were commanding. It's just the
Not
hype,
the aftermarket money that people are asking for them. It's ridiculous.
So I'll just show you this because one of the things about being on a live call is we can do this when we talk about anything. But you just mentally all guess how many Daytonas there are on Chrono 24. Just in your head, have a guess before I share the screen.
Probably an awful lot more available than there is in any of the shops in the UK.
So hopefully that should share.
9,500. Yeah.
So
I can't say I'm surprised. A lot of people just buy them and flip them, don't they?
Yeah. So, the idea that there's not that many out there for this watch.
Yeah.
It means it's an incredibly liquid market. The prices will be accurate within a given week, if you're buying from someone reputable. So there's a lot of good reasons to know that there's this many on sale. But for some reason, there's a lot of people wanting to part with them right now.
I'll be interested to know.
Cash in.
I'll be interested to know if you guys had the chance to buy one. Say, for instance, they became readily available. Would you go for the black or would you go for the white? I mean, I know the white's the hype one, but
black.
Personally, I'd go for the white face. I would.
Rolex have so screwed up their website. It takes ages to find anything. But if you give me a minute, I'll bring up the actual one on Rolex. I'm not a big fan of these. As I said, the one I'd probably want if I was going to is the Zenith. And I'd get a white dial. I know that much.
I'd go for a white dial.
Yeah. Which one have you got, Carl?
The white. I managed to get the white. I'm lucky enough to get the white. So,
But up until 3 years ago, there were 22 different options, and now there's 3. Non-gem set. So again, there's a lot out there to look for. You'll have to bear with me. And I actually don't. I mean, if we're gonna just be like, which one would you have if you had to take one for some mystical reason of today's range? I'd probably take this one because it's very, very good looking, and it's a very, very high. The quality of that on the bracelet is going to be pretty insane. But the probability,
the rose, is it?
Yeah, but the probability of any of us seeing one of these in the metal anytime soon is low. Rose gold hand.
I'm just not a big fan of rose gold, I'm afraid. I
Yeah,
prefer normal yellow gold.
I mean, I think it's going to show me.
Yeah,
but
I like that.
I find the yellow and black a little bit much for me on that one. Because
I quite like that one.
Rolex gold is really shiny. I mean,
yeah,
most gold is shiny, but Rolex do a very good job of polishing it.
But it does.
I like that one. I do like that one with the white face.
Yeah,
white face and the bimetal bracelet. That would be the one. If somebody got my arm up the back and was forcing me to have one, that'd be the one.
Yeah.
I've never tried an oyster flex on at all. But they say they're very comfortable, but I mean, you still pay a lot of money even just for the rubber strap, don't you?
Yeah.
It's,
Well,
it's crazy money.
they don't give them out. So the funniest thing about the oyster flex is it's really hard to get one. So you can't just wander in and be like, oh, here's 300 quid, I'll take a strap home with me. They limit the oyster flexes. They say, no, well, that watch isn't supposed to be on the oyster flex. That's my watch.
Yeah.
Yes, I do what I want. Yeah, it's crazy. I've
Yeah.
heard it's like that with some of the Patek Philippe's, isn't it? Some of the the green strap is supposed to be worth like thousands. It's because they don't make it anymore. On the on the Nautilus or the Aquanaut. It's the it's amazing.
Yeah. And it's understandable as a business practice, but it's also completely baffling as a business practice, because if they said to themselves, well, if every person with more than a couple of Rolexes wants to try a rubber strap, that's 20 million sales.
Yeah. Straight away.
So, but they won't do it. So everyone buys an aftermarket one and just doesn't bother.
And when you see them on the rubber straps, they do look really nice. Like really, really, really nice.
Yeah, got that modern sort of sporty feel, haven't they? And
Yeah.
I must. Yeah. I've got a Submariner as well, and I bought a rubber B strap, and I put that on sometimes. And it's quite it changes the dynamic of the watch, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like putting the vintage subs on NATO straps. It completely changes what they look like. So yeah, well, I guess we're agreed on it might continue to stay popular. I mean, I'm very sure it will, because I don't think they're going to make very many of them this decade. I think that's what they're reducing all the different lines tells you, and tweaking it slightly this year, and they'll say, all right, well, we'll make a few thousand, 10,000 a year for the next 10 years, and that's it. That's all you're going to get. I suspect that's what they'll do, and they'll make more in gold, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because historically, I forgot this in the talk itself, but the rule of thumb for Rolex, vintage Rolex, 5 to 10% of any model was gold, which is apparently true for the vintage Daytonas, which means if there was about somewhere between 17 and 19,000 produced, then that's less than 2,000 gold Daytonas, which isn't very many really, given how popular they are now. And so Rolex are probably quite happy to up the number of modern gold Rolexes quite considerably, given how many people are able to buy them. So I suspect we'll see the steel continue to be the rarest, even because that's the one most people want, and they'll just make fewer of them given the capacity they've got. So that
interestingly, I went to.
Go on.
Sorry to butt in. It's just diversifying slightly, but I did go to when the Tudor came out. The Tudor chronograph. I went to look at that. As they said, it was the new alternative, and but I must say, I do like Tudors, but I got there and I put that Tudor chronograph on. It did nothing for me at all. I couldn't, I don't know why. It should have ticked all the boxes. It's a good price and it's a great watch, but it just it didn't do it for me at all. I don't know. Has anybody else tried one?
I'm not a Tudor fan, to be honest. I don't like these snowflake and the hands on the display. It's just doesn't do anything for me.
So I like Tudor watches. I've got one, but one of the reasons I like it is I like snowflake hands, and I can see I've showed it to a few people who don't like snowflake hands, and it doesn't work for them. I really like the look of the is it called the Black Bay chronograph? And
I'm just bringing it up. I'm just using a different website because it's better than the Tudor website as well. So
I really like the look of it. When I tried it on, it felt a little bit big. It's a bit deeper. The lugs aren't quite so curved, so it didn't fit my wrist quite as nicely. But it's a really nice watch. And I saw somebody wearing one in the street the other day and thought, actually, that does look really smart.
So it's basically, This is the one you mean. They do a couple of photographs. I'll find the other one in a minute. But yeah, this is and you're all correct, because this is an oyster shaped case, but it's not an oyster case. So its proportions are slightly different.
That's interesting. That's you can actually buy that now. Just before Christmas, that was wait list of about 9 months.
Oh, these? No, because they.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I didn't know that, but all the times I've been in a Tudor boutique in this year, they've been there for sale.
Oh, have they? Very interesting.
I mean, again,
Yeah.
what would you do if you were them? You'd ask Tudor to make freaking tons of them.
Yeah.
Make as many as you can possibly sell in the Tudor range and not make many Daytonas. And everybody's winning. Tudor's a winner. The customer's supposedly a winner because they've got the classic looking watch with the black bezel and the screw down pushers. And they're not having to shell out 40 grand on the secondary market.
Yeah.
This is the interesting thing for me with watches, you know, where the price seems good, it looks great, and as you say, excuse me, when you see other people wearing things and you think, God, it looks great, it looks really cool on him, you put it on yourself, and this was a classic case for me. I put it on, it just it just didn't do it for
Didn't
me.
work.
And but I'd seen it on other people, I'd seen it in the window, and it looks great, but it's a funny thing, isn't it? But I think sometimes don't you put something on and it either rings the bell or it doesn't. It's
Yep.
I mean, we say it to everyone, and it's why we started the Watch Collectors Club. It's because it's all about trying watches on, to really enjoy a watch, to make a decision about it, to even just work out whether you should consider that type of watch. Sometimes your brand, if you're just not sure what's IWC like because they look big. Okay, well you've just got to get them on your wrist. So go to a watch event or go to the store, or if you see someone, ask them very nicely. But
and then run.
Well, it does happen, but at our events, everybody's very happy to let people try things on. But yeah, you have to have it on, and I'm all right with Tudor. I find them very comfortable. As I said, when I actually put a Rolex Daytona on, I'm a little bit more like, this feels a little bit big for me. But I always feel it comes across as chunky, as I do for most modern Rolex. I much prefer vintage Rolex if I'm gonna consider wearing them. But I do quite like the Tudors. I like the Black Bay and the Pelagos are very comfortable watches.
Yeah, they're doing a good job. It's funny though, but it was a sort of watch that you could go in and buy. But then, as you say, as we said earlier, even when they're chronograph, they start to become weightless, like the Black Bay Pro did as well. I went into a dealers in Watford, and I said, "Oh, have you got a Black Bay Pro I could look at?" And it was, it's a weightless watch. It's crazy.
But I think less Tudor. I think do that a bit for when they're new, and then the production basically just catches up.
Oh.
Yeah.
But we've seen similar at Omega. Omega was struggling to deliver some watches last year as well that were new. Breitling have done it a little bit. The bronze Breitling Super Ocean, which is a hell of a watch, that's been waitlisted since it introduced because so many Breitling collectors were like,
I want one.
And it's bronze, so they just didn't have that capacity, or the capacity, maybe they were just surprised on demand in the first year. So when I last tried it on, which was in the new Battersea boutique for Breitling, they were like, they're just going as soon as one's in the cabinet. And people are putting their name down for it. So yeah, I think a lot of watch, because of the hype of the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of watch fans think that brands play around with managing supply more than they do. I don't think they do it at all. I mean, maybe now with the big guys, Patek, AP, Rolex, clearly can now, but everybody else, they just produce the number they were always going to produce that they planned 5 years ago, and hope for the best, hope that it's a hit.
Yeah.
I must admit, I went into that into the Breitling townhouse in Regent Street.
Yeah,
that's hell of a store. That's what a fantastic place that is for a watch guy. I mean, there's bits of motorbike everywhere and plane, and we went to look. I went with a friend. We went to look at the Endurance Pro, the lightweight watch, and they said, "Oh, it's downstairs there on the pool table," and you think, wow, where would you go like that? And downstairs they got a bar there, and it's a great place. Have you ever done an event there, Hamish? Or
yeah, we did an event in November. And this week, I'll be speaking to the manager again about the next one.
Yeah. 'Cause,
That's-
it's a real cool place. I can see how these the boutiques are making, where it'd be like glass cabinets before, trying to make you a bit more at home now, and the sofas, and it's all about the experience in it. And but I thought that was great. So excuse my cat, sorry.
Bored.
Yeah, no, we really enjoyed that event. Yeah, we had the whole store, so we had the bar and drinks and everything downstairs. I talked about the chronographs. But I think if we go back, I want to talk about the dive watch history and the Super Oceans, because they're always popular, and they're very straightforward watches, but they're very popular. And at the moment, they've got in the steels, they've got all these colors, and then they've got these two bronze, the bronze with brown and the bronze with green, which both of which are absolutely outstanding. But what are we?
Bronze with green is my favorite.
Yeah. But it's because they're big, they're really good. I mean, I was just like, this is really, really good. Just the Breitling website's a bit more user friendly, so I can just go to that.
I think they lost their way, didn't they, a while back? With the Breitling Bentleys and that. And when you walk past a jeweler's window, there'd be hundreds in there, and the dials are so complicated, aren't they? But I think they've got a new CEO now, and some of the colours, and they've become a lot more modern. And I think some of the watches are, there's 2 or 3 models I could easily pick out. And I lost my love for Breitling a while back, but I think they've really, got things going again. So.
Yeah, and if you've not tried on the Pistachio Dial Premier, it's worth doing just because it's one of the most extraordinary dials of the modern era. Like, it sounds ridiculous
right
to say that, but you have to. The picture is rubbish. You've got to try the watch on and see the dial in person, whether you're ever going to buy a green watch or not. It's such an extraordinary watch. But yeah, these are the Super Oceans. So it's brown and green, yeah. Oh, and black now. And they're the old ones. So you can still buy those in some stores. But this is I think they'll stick with this now. Every time I've spoken to them, they've said this is done really well. Because they tried this, but it didn't stick around very long. And then they went to the Heritage, which they're still selling, but this is the core of the Super Ocean line. So yeah, I might do an event and talk about that. That'll be good fun. Talk about the history of the Super Ocean. So what do we think might be the next hype area in watches then? Where's fashion going to take it next?
I think it's neo vintage is the burgeoning trend at the moment.
I have seen something on that just recently, neo vintage.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to have a couple of neo vintage pieces, but yeah.
Excuse my ignorance. So neo vintage, what is that, like 70s? Is that what?
No, sort of 90s,
Yeah,
80s, 90s.
80s, 90s.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so the great thing about them, that as a period, is you can pick up quite complicated watches from great Swiss brands that are just a little bit smaller than modern watches. And so if, like me, you've got small wrists, you can pick up a watch that fits really nicely, but actually is also a sort of fraction of the price of the modern equivalent. And it was a time when the big Swiss brands were making some really special, complicated watches. So you can get some great Jaeger-LeCoultres. Blancpain from the early 90s is a treasure trove of really beautifully designed watches that are, just really good value. If you want to spend £3,000 on a dress watch.
I'm going to bring up a watch that I've already seen mentioned more than once in the last few months that Ed would buy, because Ed and I have very different taste, and is exactly the kind of watch that Ed's talking about, but it's very much not to everyone's taste. Okay, so Ed's got to guess before it loads what I'm going to bring up, but then he'll know I'm completely right.
Yeah, you've seen a bunch of these at the moment. So the Cartier Pasha, this is the perpetual calendar, isn't it?
Yeah. So
just crazy complication, weird case shape, I mean, you get proper high-end watchmaking for
But yeah,
a pretty
no money
reasonable price.
almost.
Yeah.
And I think you see the thing about this watch is it looks really 1990s, early 2000s. B, it's the Pasha, so it's one of Cartier's older ones. I'm just going to check because I think, yeah, they're quite small. So it's a 38 as well. So it's if neo vintage becomes a thing, it means a lot of, especially complications, are going to be smaller complications from different brands. But yeah,
It's nice, that is.
it's a nice watch, but it's a very
Yeah.
distinctive, very, very distinctive watch.
Mm.
Anyone else got one that would stand out from that era that might become a hot collectible now? Any ideas?
The Blancpain Villeray triple calendar. So they're what's that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they're small, 34 or 35 millimeters, but really pretty.
Not the one you meant.
Yeah,
I've not seen one of those.
That one, I think. It's just
I like that. If you go down a road,
interesting. So these are all the modern ones. Let's have a look at the older ones.
yeah. So they're just, yeah, a bit simpler. Yeah, so steel cases, and they're
Ooh,
really
you might be right
cheap
there,
prices.
Ed. You might be right. The question is, do you fancy your cost? Do they have pushers to set the calendar?
Yes, they do. Because I had a look at one the other week, and they have little pushers on the side.
Tell you what, for $4,000.
A lot of watch, isn't it? A lot of complications for that.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's a lot. It's a lot of watch, but it's small. So I think that'll be 34 or 35 millimeters.
It's 38.
It says 38, but I'd be surprised if it was 38.
Yeah.
But if it's 38, I mean, flippin' nail, that is a great watch.
Yeah, and that's a great price. Shows not many people are buying vintage Blancpain at the moment.
Yeah. No, but they're just starting. They're just sort of starting to pop up on some of the sort of high-end second-hand dealers. So there's a chap who's got a company called Watch Brothers London, and he sells extortionately priced neo vintage watches. And he's just sold a complete set of platinum Blancpain watches from the early 90s when Jean-Claude Bivet had taken over it, and they were just making these ultra complicated watches. And I dread to think what he sold the 6 for, but
yeah,
you're just starting to see people take a bit more notice of them.
Really interesting because that layout is so much more. So it's the same, still perfection, but with that movement, for some reason, is so much more. I don't know enough about Blancpain to know really. Anyone else got a suggestion for the next sleeper hit neo vintage watch?
In the 90s, I was kind of into Breitlings a bit more, really. So I bought Breitlings, and I got a bit fed up with Rolex and stayed away from them. And no, my sister had a tag F1, the sort of, and she gave it to me because the battery went, and I had it at work for ages. It got so dusty, and in the end I threw it away, and I see they've become a little sort of bit more popular now, even though it's just a little quartz watch. But yeah, it was of a time. It's I can't. I said, like, I couldn't get a battery. I said, do you want it? And she said no. So I threw it away. It's crazy, really. But
The original series of those is now super collectible.
One of my
I guess it's always.
I've got a couple.
Have you got a couple?
Yeah.
Have you got the colourful one?
No, I haven't got the colourful ones. They're just the regular black and
Black
cream dials.
How good a condition's the plastic in?
Well worn. Let's just say.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what I have got, which is a
But they're
dead
smart.
ringer for it, is the Zodiac Formula Swiss.
Oh, cool.
It's an absolute dead ringer for it.
Who is it? That's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
interesting price.
And that is so much more, such a better condition than the tags.
So it's a Zodiac from that time, is it?
From the same era. I
Yeah.
believe, I don't know, but I believe they were both owned by the same people at the same time.
Right.
And obviously cross-design things. But I don't know if you could get on Chrono 24 a Zodiac Formula Swiss or Swiss Formula. Swiss Formula is what they're called. No, you stay there. You had a problem with a cat. I've got a problem with a dog.
Let's see what it brings up. I should just say it's going to bring something up, but these with the luminous original, with the original bezel luminous
That's
style,
the one that I've got. One of those.
they've gone up a
And then
lot.
I've got the top right, the black on black.
I thought these had gone up a lot more than that. So I don't know if that's a later model, but the original series of these with the all lume dial, which Tag just recreated last year, but in a limited edition,
Yeah.
are very, very popular as being vintage. And I'm surprised at these prices. If that one was in good condition, I'd be happy with that for 400 quid. It's a lovely looking watch.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
To me anyway. Right, what do you say? Zodiac Swiss. Let's see what it brings up.
Formula Swiss.
Mm,
I'm just having a look on my watch now.
yeah,
On
that's
my,
that one, isn't it? That one. Like that.
No, it's Swiss Formula, sorry, not Formula Swiss.
Yeah, it's not come up with any. Must be quite Swiss Formula.
No, it's not showing any.
No, not.
Uh,
Anyone else
see if
before
I can
we
get one on my phone.
finish up?
I've just had a look at the Zodiac Swiss Formula on
Google.
Google Images. Spitting image,
Yeah,
but
absolute
lovely
dead ringer.
colours actually. I really like the blue they use.
Oh yeah,
Oh, interesting.
it's a homage watch from the 1990s.
Yeah,
Oh, they are cool.
Smart.
Breguet would be my other pick for sleeper hits.
Yeah, of course. But then everyone's been talking about that for ages.
Yeah, it's not done. I mean, prices have just started to tick up. As I'm sort of currently in the market for one. Sod's Law is they're going up.
What's the main
yeah,
class?
it's bound to.
I like the Classique.
Yeah, sorry, I can't type today. Bit tired. Yeah, so if we go classic and we go, because there's so many of them,
Yeah, so if you were to do,
what the price
I
is.
don't know,
And these are with the handmade cases and stuff.
Yeah.
That's the advantage of going to this area of Breguet.
Yeah.
Yeah, not bad value. White gold. Yeah, that one. Pretty much
Yeah, smart.
identical to the one they sell today for a third of the price.
Wow.
And actually, again, yeah, if you did your research on these, you'd probably find some of them are handmade, depending on when it was in the 90s.
Yeah, they're really beautiful watches, and
This
yeah,
one.
playing around with, you can get some really nice complications in a handmade case with a hand turned dial. Yeah, for what is they're expensive. Don't get me wrong, they're expensive, but they easily compare to a Patek or a Lange in case finishing.
So I just checked the size on that, because the size of that one today is 39 or 40, and that's in 36. And I bet you that's absolute delight in the metal. Yeah. That design.
It's a nice looking watch.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's where to fish. We don't do recommendations, but if Neo Vintage is going to happen, this is the kind of thing that we think could probably do pretty well. I think that's the best way to say it. That is a nice watch.
Shopping.
Yeah, we usually keep it to an hour, so I'll wrap up there. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. It's flown by as always. The
Thank
next
you very much.
You're welcome. The next one, I'm
Yeah.
going to do the first 100 years of Patek. So that's 1845 to 1945, which is, there's a lot of change in Patek in those years, but hopefully it'll be quite interesting. Then we'll talk about Patek more general. And then in July, I'll talk about post-war Patek and the fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and of course, very famous Pateks we saw come out, like the, what's it called? Calendar chronograph. Oh, there you go, Russ. Yeah, is that what you're
That's
on?
my Swiss Formula, yeah.
Very
And
smart.
the Formula, the Tag F1 that I've got is a dead ringer for it, but the condition of the tag is nowhere near as good as that.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool.
So yeah, hope to see you on a future event, either online or in person. But thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks
Cheers.
very
Have a
much.
nice evening. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.